Appreciate the opportunity to speak here this afternoon. I'm a little bit different than the previous two speakers that I've actually had some experience with the Federal Reserve. In the 1980s, I worked in the belly of the beast, as they say, at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas doing data communications and line encryption. I can assure you that it's not federal and there's no reserve. Laughter broke out my second week on the job when I asked to see the reserve, and they pointed to a disk drive about the size of a washing machine. Why is the Federal Reserve evil? I hear people say it's evil. It's unbelievably evil. The reason it's evil is because it gives your congressman, your senator, and worse than that, your president, an unlimited credit card to engage in adventures and unfunded mandates to get reelected, to send pork back to their district, to do all kinds of unmitigated evil things. It's very important to you, I see young people in the room, to gain control of your own money again, because if you don't gain control of your money and your currency, you may well face inflation, hyperinflation. You may not be able to own that home or get that car that you want. It's very important for you to own that home and get that car that you want. It's amazing to me when the Federal Reserve can make a few strokes at the computer keyboard and give money for free, for 0%, unlimited amount of money to these banks. And the banks will charge you 5, 10, 15% for a home. Or worse, that they'll try and trick you into variable interest rate on a home, gambling that you won't be smart enough to realize that that interest may rise, or that you may lose under inflation, or even lose under deflation as the time comes. The Federal Reserve needs to go, along with its sister, the Internal Revenue Service. I was born, I hate to admit this in a southern crowd, but I was born in Yankeeville, but I got to the south as fast as I could. I was born in a place in the Minnesota-Iowa border, but I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I've known Ron on the acquaintance level since the late 1970s. I've known, he's the exception among congressmen. I've known several congressmen, I've known a few U.S. senators. I've shaken the hand of U.S. presidents, and I tell you that most U.S. senators, I'll make a joke, I won't give you a name, but the congressman I know well, I make a joke, I say he tells the truth 25% of the time. Well, Ron Paul, I'm here to tell you, he tells the truth close to 99.9%. It's such a relief to listen to Ron Paul speak on the national stage, because he actually, you see a thought process going underway. You see what I call a hard science thought process. He's telling you not what you want to hear, not what his PR-driven, public relations-driven polls tell him to say, but he's driven from what he looks at and from the reasons. He's like a wonderful good doctor who's telling you maybe you should cut back on your smoking or cut back on your alcohol so you live forever. That's what he's telling the United States, that we have to cut back on our spending, that we have to cut back on our unlimited, our unwinnable, endless wars abroad, and maybe start building bridges here and preparing the roads here. Now, I'm not a Ron Paul cultist. I disagree with maybe 5 or 10% of what he has to say. I've watched our industries go to China over the past 20, 30 years. I was a businessman. I was an entrepreneur in the late 70s before I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Communist China, mainland China, does have a rigged currency. Their currency is being rigged by the New York City, London bankers so that they can bring products here at a wholesale price of close to zero. I don't know if you read the Wall Street Journal article a year and a half back about the guy that had a mill in North Carolina that the federal government gave him a grant to robotize just about his entire factory, which he did. He laid off 90% of his workers so he could put shirts and slacks together by robots. And he found, to his astonishment, that he could not get the yarn as cheap as China could ship completed shirts and slacks across the ocean. That has to stop. That has to stop. And maybe we should start looking at targeted tariffs as a replacement for the Internal Revenue Service in this way the Constitution intended. Customs duties instead of, that'll build our industry, instead of the harder you work, the more money the government takes. That's insane. That's absolutely insane when you have to work 2 jobs or you have to work overtime to make the same amount of money you made 5 years ago and the government wants to take a larger percentage. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. What I'd also like to talk a little bit about is some of his more controversial aspects of what Ron Paul has to say. People say, well, he wants to legalize marijuana, and he wants to legalize prostitution, he wants to do this, wants to do that. When I grew up, criminal law was the legitimate bailiwick of the individual states. Murder, thievery, burglary, whatever crime, was up to the states to decide. And what you see is the absurd notion of sovereign states, such as California and Montana, saying that people can have things such as medical marijuana that helps them with a doctor's prescription, and then have the federal government come in and arrest people for prescribing a medicine. That's absolutely insane, and that needs to end. You know, they're doing that to make their careers, they're doing it to make their resumes, they're not doing it to help people. Doctors should decide what medicines people should have, not the federal government, not a lawyer, and God forbid a policeman. You know, doctors should decide what medicines people should have. So, that's absurd. Now, on the topic of the war, if there are evildoers, and I've had the fortune, after I left the Fed, I went to work for American Airlines corporate headquarters. I traveled all around the world. And I'm telling you that people in the Middle East, and I'm telling you that Arabs and people in the Middle East, what I hear from them, and I do have friends overseas. I have friends in Iran. I've had friends, still have friends in Palestine and Gaza. What I hear from them is, we don't hate the American people, but we really dislike your government meddling in our affairs and assassinating our brothers and our elected representatives. That needs to stop. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. I really enjoy, people that know me know I can talk for days. So I'll limit my remarks. I'll start wrapping up here. But it's very important that you work for Ron Paul and you get an honest man in office again. Whatever you can do. A lot of people are financially stressed now, but if you can lend time to your local Ron Paul people organizer, it all boils down to the primaries. It all boils down to the primaries and getting in through the primary. You need to get the intelligent people. You need to get the young out. You need to get the people that read for information. Instead of watching Fox News and the mainstream media, you need to get them to the primaries. I was amazed. I had someone, and I don't know any names, and yada, 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 but I had a lady call me the last time around and said, well, I'm a Mitt Romney supporter. And I said, well, why do you support him? And she said, well, I don't really know it. I like his haircut and he sounds good. I said, well, what about Ron Paul? And she said, well, he's a strange bird. And this lady was maybe 55, 65, middle-aged. And I'm saying, can you define strange bird? What specifically was his policy of it? You don't want? I said, well, he doesn't like war in the Middle East. I said, well, I don't like endless war without victory anywhere. And I don't like taking on people who have never attacked us. And so we got to do what? We need to get people who actually read and think. We need to get people who are aware of what planet they're on, who actually weigh the options, do the math, do the outside reading. We need to get intelligent people voting in the primary. Please do all you can in the primary for Ron Paul. That's the wrap up of my speech. Thank you very much. Policy for immigration. I think we should bring the troops home, protect the borders, and have...
I'm talking about immigration.
Immigration?
Immigration.
Into the United States?
Yes.
I don't know if I take the Ron Paul view. I take the controversial view that anybody that wants to cross the desert and work in the United States, we should swear them in. If they want us to take the oath to the Constitution of the United States to become legal, they should work. We need people that can work in this country. My grandparents came from Friesland. One came from West Friesland, East Friesland. One is part of Germany, others from Holland. And if you want to cross an ocean to work, there needs to be a mechanism in place that you can work in this country. There needs to be a mechanism. There needs to be a mechanism. I'd love to see more people. The payrolls expand and the industries come out. Yes, sir. On the Federal Reserve System? Since I work for the Fed? Well, there's 11 Federal Reserve banks. The Class A shares, if you will, are controlled by the New York City Fed. It's like American Airlines. You can invest in American Airlines. You can invest in a bank or an insurance company. But usually there's a ruling family. I shouldn't say ruling, that's a conversion. There's a leading family, perhaps, or a founders organization, or a leading group of managers. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York sets Federal Reserve policy. What that means to you is they determine what interest rates you will pay on your car and on your house, and what interest rates they'll charge the member banks of the Federal Reserve System. That has enormous effect in making your decision. I don't know, I see young people, I see people, I hate to say it's my age in the audience, but if you remember, in 1970, gasoline, we went in 1970 with gasoline costing 25 cents a gallon in Dallas. We came out in 1979 with gasoline costing $1.25 and with bread costing $1.25. What happens when you get into inflation is you end up running a race with your employer. So I need a raise because the cost of living has went up. And then you get into this negotiating thing. You might actually lose. Even if you get a raise of, say, 3-5%, you will lose under inflation. The Federal Reserve inflates at will, and the reason they inflate at will is because that the people that have access to that money at the beginning, and what I mean is the people that, the big New York City banks that are able to lend that out through the system, they have the full value of that money. Because the market, and that's the market and the people believe there's still the same amount of dollars chasing the same amount of goods, but as that money percolates down to the member banks of the system out through the heartland of America, so to speak, people quickly figure out that there's more paper than there is goods, and the price of goods tend to rise. Now, the reason presidents and congressmen love to do that, and I'll give the quick example of Lyndon Johnson, is that he wanted to have a war and a great society, what he called the Great Society. He wanted to greatly expand Medicare and do some other things, social programs, without going to Congress and actually honestly financing them. If he went to Congress and said, we want to have Vietnam, the congressman would say, okay, what plans do you have to win this conflict? And Lyndon would have to say, as Bob McNamara said, well, we have no idea how we're going to win this thing, how long it's going to take. And then the Congress would say, well, why don't you drop the nuclear bomb, or why don't you go to North Carolina? Lyndon Johnson would say, well, we can't do that. And Congress would say, wow, this sounds like a bad deal. We're spending this money and we don't end up with anything in return. So he decided to inflate, to have his war, and also to do the Great Society. Throughout history, through the Greeks and Romans, traditionally the executive branch, and what I mean by the executive branch, meaning the kings or the queens, or in our case, the presidents or the dictators, they do things that people don't want by debasing the currency. On a side note, maybe this will help you a little bit to understand. In 1963, when I was a young man, when I was 7 years old, 8 years old, quarters were real silver. Dimes were silver. Half dollars. The young people won't realize this. They were silver, real silver, valuable metal. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson took the silver out of those quarters and dimes and stuck copper in the middle. We used to call them Johnson sandwiches, and we knew, those of us that were cerebrally inclined knew exactly what he was up to, because that's exactly what the Roman emperors and the Greek dictators would do when they wanted to pull a fast one on the population. If you have in your pocket, by chance, that quarter that you had when you were a child, that 1963 silver quarter, in 1963 that quarter would buy you a gallon of gasoline with change for a Coke. If you still have that 1963 quarter in your pocket, that'll still buy you a gallon of gasoline and change for a Coke. Money doesn't change in value. For those of you, if you had 3/4 ounces of gold in Jesus' time, in Roman times, 3/4 ounce, it's not very heavy, that would buy you 2 togas, 2 belts, 2 very good handmade pairs of sandals. If you had that 3/4 ounce of gold today, you go to Brooks Brothers and it'll buy you 2 suits, 2 belts, and you can get some American-made shoes, some Alabama-made shoes. Real money doesn't change in value. Funny money, fiat money, Federal Reserve notes changes in value. Now sometimes with the Fed shenanigans, you can come out under inflation. My father bought a house and he locked in a mortgage payment and an interest rate where he paid $200 a month for a house that 4 years into the Federal Reserve inflation was worth about $1,000 Federal Reserve notes. But you have to be very careful when a politician says something, when he gets up on this podium and says something like dollars or says something like freedom and liberty. Because often what I've found, and I've had several close friends, and I've met several of them, when politicians say words like freedom and liberty or dollars, that's not what they mean. That paper $1 bill is not a dollar. A dollar is a unit of silver. A dollar that they say is a dollar is a piece of paper that doesn't even work well for toilet paper. Not that I've used it, but I've tried to use it. But it's just a piece of paper. Now, times have changed. Since I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank in the 1980s, things have changed. The electronic revolution has taken place, where in the old days they would just shovel dollars out, or they'd make book entries in other people's, and usually banks, to inflate the money supply, where now it's strokes on the keyboard, where they can debase your money. And there's a debate going on when the TARP thing came down a couple years back, whether we would go into inflation or hyperinflation. And we haven't seen inflation or hyperinflation yet, because we've run up to the 20-25% unemployment rate, real unemployment rate in this country. We've got people in the suburbs where I live, in Boiling Springs, trying to piece together 2 or 3 part-time jobs to make it. What I've seen in my lifetime also, since getting back to inflation, since Lyndon Johnson, I'm 56 years old, is I've seen where you have to have the husband and the wife go to work to have the same purchasing power as prior to the 1960s that you had. And that's disastrous for the children. That's disastrous. You end up having latchkey children. You end up having children that go to daycare at 2 years old. You end up having the Democrats pushing us for school buses to pick them up at 3 and 4 years of age. At 5:45 in the morning, there's a kindergarten bus goes by where I live, Bow Springs, pulls children out before it's dark, takes them out of their warm home, puts them in a public government school. I mean, it's traumatic. That would be traumatic for me at 4 or 5 years old if I was pulled out of my home before dawn. So you have these bad consequences of giving your politicians that unlimited credit card, because they will spend on projects that have little or no value in the real world just to get reelected. You have to pay attention to what they're doing, and it's more difficult to pay attention to what politicians are doing if they can say, well, you don't have to be taxed to pay for this war, or you don't have to be taxed to pay for this green project in the sky. It's very important to pay attention to what the politicians are doing. We have to get rid of the Federal Reserve Bank, and we have to phase out the IRS. This is the point line. This is the line. Any other questions? This is a speech on question. Yes, sir.
Do you think consecutive tariffs are consistent with laissez-faire capitalism?
I believe in laissez-faire capitalism, and what you mean by that is hands-off and free trade. But what we have with Asia is not free trade, it's rig trade. Anytime you have currency manipulation going on, you don't have real free trade. Now, if the Chinese decide to let the yuan float, and I read this in the papers all the time, I read this, even in the European papers I read it, it's up to the Chinese, it's not. It's up to the International Money Fund, up to about 10 guys in London, what that Chinese yuan is worth. If the yuan really floats and becomes an honest, libertarian, laissez-faire currency, it will appreciate about 80% value the next day. And then we could probably get about 10 million jobs back. Yes, sir?
Could we just return to a gold standard and demand that in exchange?
That's a possibility also. We could demand gold and silver in exchange. Interestingly enough, by my PhD friends that I spoke to, the economist friends, is that the Chinese, they have some gold, but not a lot. Surprisingly, in the Arabic countries, they've been accumulating gold. And also, Russia has been accumulating gold. They're one of the biggest gold producers in the world. Yes?
What do you think about the idea of protect the competing currencies in the states where they're basing gold and silver against the American dollar?
I think that's a wonderful idea, but that may lead to a Fort Sumter conflict again. I really like the idea of competing currencies. I know, that's what I was saying. What's wrong with that? And I get into discussions with my northern friends all the time. So we all can't succeed. And I said, well, in Texas we have a lot of ICBMs and we have one of the 2 nuclear bomb plants, so we might work out.
But it's in the Constitution that we can do that.
Yeah, it's constitutional that states can do that. They can do that.
So why is that
a lot of times what I've seen is the federal government doesn't like the Constitution of the United States. I've heard of cases, and I know of cases where federal agents do not like the Constitution of the United States. And I've seen, just like you've seen, congressmen taking that oath, and they forget it the next day. I don't think they even know. I don't think it's taught in law schools anymore, or they must have slept through it or cribbed the class. They don't know what it means. They don't understand the concept of limited government. Limited government is a tough sell if you're a congressman or a senator. It really is. When Ron Paul tells a story when he was talking to run for Congress the first time. He told his wife, I don't know how well I'll do because it's hard to run against Santa Claus. Santa Claus being the federal government. Well, now Santa Claus, his bag is empty, and he owes money. And they've got a lot of older people that are looking for those itty-bitty checks that may or may not be there. I spoke with, and it looks like he's gone now, the gentleman who's running for Secretary of State of North Carolina. I have many Russian and Ukrainian friends. I live in North Boiling Springs. And I talked to them and said, how did you do? How well did you do when the Soviet Union broke down? When the government totally collapsed? And they laugh at me and they say, well, we did better than we think y'all are going to do when your government collapses. And I said, how's that? And they said, well, we expected our government to collapse and our checks to be delayed. Y'all still think it'll go on forever. And y'all will probably be surprised. So it's important to be prepared. The sun's in the way. Can I take a question?
Yeah, it's actually a two-parter. What major countries still back their dollars or whatever they use for currency with gold? And the other one is, do we actually have like gold stores back, say, like you're talking about, a state-credited dollar instead of a federal reserve credited dollar? I mean, because it's not an infinite supply. There's only a limited amount of gold.
I'm understanding, I have to look at, they don't have Wi-Fi here, but I think there's only 2 countries that actually back their currency with real money. And Switzerland used to be for a long time, and I think now you have to fill out some paperwork now. Back in the days, if you were a few years back, say 10 years back, if you were uncomfortable with a Swiss piece of paper that said Swiss franc, you go to Swiss bank and say, I don't trust the bank, or I don't trust the Swiss government. They say, well, we'll give it to you in gold or silver. Okay. And that kept their currency honest. It's still the strongest currency in the world because it's perceived as being an honest currency. And the perception is that you can get silver or gold for your Swiss franc, whether or not you really can. Your second, I'm sorry, I forgot your second question.
Yeah, the second was, I mean, do we actually have enough gold in possession to back a state or federally credited instead of like a government credited dollar instead of one that's backed by the Federal Reserve?
My answer to that is we have enough silver, but we may or may not, and that's the open question, have enough gold. But nobody knows if we have enough gold to back the currency as it is now. That's controversial, and I don't even know. Back in the day, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York actually had a gold vault, but they didn't have any gold. They had other countries' gold, and our gold supposedly was stored at Fort Knox. But I get that question a lot by people. They say, well, it's crazy you don't have enough silver or gold to back your currency by silver or gold. That's impossible. And I said, well, I was born in 1954, and I lived till 63, 64, till I was a 7-year-old child. Everybody had silver dimes, quarters, half dollars in their pocket. And if you look around at the jewelry that people have right now, I have enough. I have $100 worth of silver on my hand right now. So yeah, we have enough silver. If you wanted to convert to silver-backed electronic money, even. No one likes. A lot of people. Let me tell you, a lot of people don't like carrying gold in their pockets. And I wish I should have brought a couple of gold coins. It's heavy. Gold coins are heavy, and they sparkle. The disadvantage of that is they weigh your pocket down, or they weigh your purse down. And if someone knows you're carrying gold, they'll see that flash of gold, and you may be subject to robbery, particularly if someone has worthless paper notes. But what people like to do is carry silver coins in their pocket or in their purse. They weigh less. If you could have an electronic money backed by silver or gold, where the politicians wouldn't do financial shenanigans, in my opinion, that would be the ideal. But I'm open to the competing currencies by the states, and I think that's what Ron Paul New Rockwell are talking about. That's a very good idea, in my opinion. Additional, yes, sir?
Recently, Malcolm Forbes predicted that within 5 years we'll be back in the gold standard. Did you hear that?
I've read that article, and I believe we will. C. Forbes, yeah. I believe we will be back to some form of gold standard within 5 years. I believe that to be true. And we may already be moving in that direction. I don't know. We've had a little bit downward trajectory in the price of gold, but if you drive down the street, see, we buy gold, and it was $1,600 an ounce with the $1,800. I don't know what it is today. You'll see a little bit of a jawtooth back and forth, but you're going to see the price of gold continue to rise. It looks like what the Fed is doing through the back door is getting QE3 underway. And if that gets underway within 3-4 years, you'll have gold price of $5,000 an ounce. And that means that your wife or your husband or whatever is going to go to that back bedroom and say, man, I got this old jewelry. Find out what it's worth. I got this ring that my ex-husband gave me as high school. Find out what it's worth and sell it. So you will see that. You will see that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. I'll be around for just a few minutes again.
If you can take the time, I think it's